If you were here 364 days ago, you remember that I spoke about Apollo 11 and its place in the history of philosophical thought and feeling. And you may also remember that I threatened to come back a year later during the 50th anniversary and talk about it some more. And if you remember that and you came back anyway, I thank you for your courage and your forbearance. Because a lot of people would say, not again, that's not you, so bless you. Many of us in this room were around in 1969. We remember. We remember the extraordinary sense of national pride, the electric and excitement in the air as we drew closer and closer to achieving this goal of placing human beings in another celestial body, fulfilling a dream that mankind has held probably since we first figured out that ever-changing thing in the sky was not some kind of a hole in the dome of heaven through which the light would shine through from God. Above all, our space program was the focus of extraordinary optimism. I was still pretty young, and I didn't fully understand at the time how deeply divided the nation was, with America embroiled in an increasingly unpopular war in Vietnam and race riots and a lot of despair over the suddenly rebellious nature of the country's teenagers. I was aware of all that only vaguely because what I cared about was the positive things that I could see on the evening news with Chet Huntley and David Brinkley, and of course, Uncle Walter. We called him Uncle Walter, didn't we? How much we loved and trusted Walter Cronkite and how much faith we placed in his every word. He was excited about every aspect of our exploration in space, and so we were too. What a wonderful time it was to be a little boy with those dreams. The way I remember it, and please tell me if you remember it differently, the actual landing on the moon seemed to vindicate all those earlier years of optimism. We had believed, we had invested, and we were right. If we can do this, it seemed, maybe there is no limit on what we can do. It became a new figure of speech, didn't it? Instead of saying, well, we could no more do X than we could fly to the moon, as we had said before, we started saying, well, it seems to me that if we could put a man on the moon, we can fill in the blank. Now, in those days, my birthday was in February. Still is, of course. I'm just talking about then. February 1970 was a particularly cold and rainy one, so I didn't have the big outdoor birthday party that was traditional in Alabama in those days. And my dear sweet parents felt that I had been cheated. But they could not help but notice that my real enthusiasm for the year was not about February the 2nd, but about July 20th, that we were coming up on the first anniversary of our landing on the moon. So my folks decided that we would celebrate my birthday on July 20th, and we've done that ever since. My mother called me yesterday to wish me a happy birthday. But here's the thing. I want to show you a photo that should come up in this video, and prepare to be amazed. Prepare to be amazed because when I was 12 years old, I had hair. Yeah, this is me and some of my buddies in 1973 celebrating July 20th. My mom was a brilliant cake decorator, and every year she would make us a new and original Apollo 11 cake of some kind. So there I am getting ready to cut it. Now, Mom and Dad had the idea that year of calling the city's big newspaper, the Birmingham News, in the hopes that they'd like this as a human interest story. And they did. That's where this photo came from. I wish that I had a better scan of the article itself, but July 21st, 1973. Do you remember Sunday night 4 years ago? The writer of the article says, remember what happened? Bet you've already forgotten. Lee Shackleford and Gardendale Friends haven't. They've been commemorating the event every year with a party. This year there's a space capsule-shaped cake, posters of rockets and spaceman Neil Armstrong. Remember now? Sunday night 4 years ago was July 20th, and just before midnight our time, Neil Armstrong was the first man to set foot on the moon. Lee's had a party every year since then, said his father. He and 8 or 10 neighborhood kids get together and just have a good time. Lee's a space nut, said Mrs. Shackleford. And since his birthday's in February when the weather's always so bad, he celebrates the moon landing anniversary instead. He hasn't missed a year so far. It's this last line. Funny how quickly most of us forget, isn't it? And I don't remember this well at all, but since that time, well, let me rewind the clock again, talking about Walter Cronkite. Here we are in 1969.
The date's now indelible. It's going to be remembered as long as man survives. July 20th, 1969, the day man reached and walked on the moon.
Indelible, the man says. We'll never forget this, he says. And then we did. Not only forgot it, but have started to deny it. There are now thousands, maybe millions of people who think that the whole thing was some kind of scam, that it was faked in a Hollywood studio, and they debate about photographs and film clips in ways that not only show their staggering ignorance of science, but a bizarrely optimistic view of what filmmakers were capable of doing in 1969. And of course, in doing so, they call every one of the 400,000 people involved in putting man on the moon a liar. And if you ask me, they defame the honor of everyone who has worked for any NASA subcontractor since, including several friends of mine, including our own Barbara Beyer, whose name is Beyer and not Liar. And the whole thing makes me want to punch somebody in the nose, as Buzz Aldrin famously did. I thought about showing that video too, but anyway. Thus the title of my talk today, What on Earth Happened? Because that is an expression we use, isn't it? Whatever happened, it didn't happen on the moon. Something went off the rails here. The future that I felt I had been promised as a kid was one of ever-increasing achievement and innovation, about securing our foothold in the heavens with vast permanent structures, orbiting complexes where people would live and work and play, and where tourists could visit and learn and gain a new perspective on the universe. But no, since then I've been told by people who claim to know better, that we can't build things like that. It's not within our technical capacity. Well, we can't build something like you see in this piece of art here, because that would mean building a complete mechanical city where hundreds of people would live and work completely separated from the mundane earthbound world. What do you think, it's going to be powered by an atomic reactor functioning 24/7, 365? We can't do that. And if it's going to be in space, it would have to be a completely sealed environment where people would be recycling their own air, where they would have to be creating all of their own needs, sealed up for weeks, even months, without ever contacting the outside world. We can't do that. And even if we did do that, so much of space hardware is obsolete as soon as it's used. You don't think that we're going to build fleets of vehicles and then simply abandon them somewhere. Taxpayers deserve more responsible use of our nation's wealth than that. No, we choose instead to make endless weapons of war because we will support absolutely anything that we believe contributes to our security. Which means I need to talk about the great theologian Paul Tillich. During the time when the US of A, were first reaching for the stars, Tillich was noting with real concern the extraordinary revival of participation in faith traditions in America. Evangelists were drawing audiences of thousands, tens of thousands even. Attendance and membership in churches of all kinds were absolutely skyrocketing. Cults were springing up, as Tillich said, like mushrooms. But if you said the country was going nuts for religion, Tillich would say that you may be using the wrong word. A lot of what was happening, maybe most of it, was not, to his way of thinking, religious. There's no question that that's a problematic word. Many of us have a gut reaction when somebody asks us if we're religious, or when we speak of religious people. We have in our minds an idea of what that word means, but it's not consistent. It's shaped for each of us by experiences that it may be impossible to ever get the word back to its original or basic meaning. Merriam-Webster may come closest to what Tillich had in mind, That dictionary calls it a faithful devotion to an acknowledged ultimate reality. That's kind of amazing, isn't it? If someone asked me if I was religious, I would probably say no. But if they asked me if I was faithfully devoted to an ultimate reality that I acknowledge, I'd say, oh, hell yes. You kidding me? Here's what Tillich wrote in an article for the Saturday Evening Post. Being religious means asking passionately the question of the meaning of our existence and being willing to receive the answers, even if the answers hurt. Such an idea of religion makes religion universally human, but it certainly differs from what's usually called religion. It does not describe religion as the belief in the existence of God or any gods, and as a set of activities and institutions for the sake of relating oneself to these beings in thought, devotion, and obedience. This definition of religion is a state of being concerned about one's own being and about being universally. Tillich felt that people were basically forming big clubs, big cheering sections for their favorite teams, some of which are called the faithful, the saved, and even the chosen. And the timing of all of this may or may not have had anything to do with Nikita Khrushchev making a big deal about Americans being decadent in their reliance on a mythical god for their protection, when right-thinking Russians knew better and were preparing to protect themselves. Horrors, our side of the world said. We knew those people over there were wrong, but we never could say exactly why. Now we know why. Because they don't have God. And so, in 1954, we added the words "under God" to our Pledge of Allegiance. In 1956, we adopted "In God We Trust" as our national motto. And in 1957, the motto began appearing on all of our money. All of this just to thumb our noses at the godless communists behind the Iron Curtain. And one result, as I imagine you know, is that many people now believe and will insist to their dying breath that this God language has always been part of American culture and the American way of life and American history. If we are a Christian nation, then our nation is only 65 years old, because this did not start until the Cold War. It just didn't. So here's what I think, in case you're interested. I think Tillich was right. And in fact, the reach, the expanse of what he was talking about goes further than perhaps even he realized. Everybody has a God. Everybody. Tillich is saying. And it's probably not a Judeo-Christian Muslim model of an eternal being on high. Our gods are comfort. Our gods are security. Our gods are affirmation and self-worth and self-image. And many of the millions who are gathered in their houses of worship right now are committed to the ideal that their God sits in heaven, when in fact their gods are right here and never far from their minds. So here's what I think happened to space exploration. It was a race. It was the main reason for going to the moon was to show the Ruskies that we could do it. Don't ever think that that wasn't the main motivation. It wasn't the only reason. And so I still hold on to the belief and the understanding, because it's not a simply romantic one, that this was a voyage and a mission of science and of exploration. But the reason Congress put 5% of the national budget into this one program was because our God, our national God, is security. Our God is dominance. If you're on top, then we can feel we are at peace. And we did it. We won. Here's how astronaut Buzz Aldrin described the reception that he and other Apollo 11 astronauts received after they returned. They went on a tour of the world.
Many signs that said, we did it. Not us. We, they, the whole world. We all had that identical feeling. By golly, we, mankind, did this thing, and we're all brothers
certainly be nice if we could use the space program to further that feeling. How to do it is a more complicated question.
Yes, it is, Mike. To hold on to this momentary feeling that existed for this brief window of time, the universal siblinghood, this idea of a great family of earth. Maybe we felt if we could keep going, if we could keep reaching milestone after milestone, then it would become evident that this was not just something done by Americans to beat out the Russians, but by human beings to drive back ignorance and narrow-mindedness. Here's Neil Armstrong in South America, that same world tour, being asked what it felt like to be on the moon. He answers very slowly so the translator can keep up.
I felt very small and very lucky. And as we looked up on the surface of the moon, we could see above us up here the planet Earth. And it was very small, but it was very beautiful. And it looked like an oasis in the heavens. And we thought it was very important at that point for us and men everywhere to save that planet as a beautiful oasis that we together can enjoy for all the future.
Do you remember that the way I do? Isn't that how we all felt? But after the noise died down, after we went to the moon 6 more times, then the world of science and kids like me looked to everyone else and said, so, where to next? And the world's answer was, we did that. We're done. We did it. We're done because we got what we wanted. We made sacrifices to our God, and our God was pleased. So where do we go, all of us who consider ourselves religious in Tillich's definition? Because my religious passion about science, about exploration, has not been satisfied. I don't feel like we're done. I don't feel like it's over. And I feel like we're 50 years behind schedule. So one of the UU hymns asks, where is our holy church? And I believe it's in the research laboratory and in the library and at the bottom of the ocean and in the rainforest and in our Antarctica. At meetings of AA and NA and ACOA. Everywhere people are committed to learning the truth even when it hurts. And everywhere where people are committed to taking the risks, whatever they are, to go someplace that no one's ever been before. To see what's there. To learn all that's learnable. Like in here. It can happen in here. So that's why I maintain my passion for our exploration of the universe as a religious passion. I'll show you a relic. I'll show you an icon of my religious passion. That photograph of me and my friends in the newspaper brought a letter to our house from a man named Scott Hessick, who was a mission control engineer. He was one of the 65 people in that firing room in Houston on that day. And he was living in Birmingham at that time. And he saw the picture and said, "You're right, people are forgetting. Thank God that these kids remember." And he asked if he could come to the next year's party. And he did. It's funny that I don't have any pictures of me or any of us with Scott. It's funny. But he brought a number of his treasures, things that he had been saving since 1969, which was only 6 years in the past at that point. But he asked me sort of toward at the end of the day if I would like any of his security badges, like the one that Barbara's wearing. And I said, I'll take the one that says Apollo 11 on it. I've often said that if our house was on fire and I was sure that Reagan and Karen were okay. This is what I'm going back in for. I'll close by telling you my favorite aspect of Apollo 11, though, the part that still feels to me most like worship, if I can do it without tearing up again, as I often do. Even as an 8-year-old, I was aware, how could I not be, watching the evening news every night, that we Americans were in the midst of this struggle, this thing called a Cold War with the Soviet Union, and much of this one-upsmanship was happening in our efforts to outdo each other in space. They had made it to space first, the Russians had. They had orbited the Earth first. They had gone further and dared more than we had. They were kicking our butts. And we all knew what it meant, the threat of the atom bomb, ever in our minds. The mastery of rockets and rocket science could mean mastery of the world. In 1969, we could have made a permanent orbiting observation post, locked in geosynchronous orbit so that it hung like the sword of Damocles over Moscow. We could have done that. We could have made that our goal. But we didn't. We had the technology even then to have ringed the Earth with nuclear satellites, all poised to rain death down on anybody we chose. We could have made that our goal. But we didn't. Here's what we did instead. We built this odd, spindly little spidery thing and put 2 people inside it and took it down to the moon. And on the part that is left behind, there's a marker, a plaque, etched into indestructible metal. And in the vacuum of the lunar surface, undisturbed and unchanging, it remains, and it always will. If we, the people of Earth, manage to annihilate each other, and you know it's possible, the marker will still be there. Here it is, best as can be seen, the whole world, and it reads, "Here men from the planet Earth first set foot upon the moon, July 1969 AD. We came in peace for all mankind." May it ever be so.